Welcome to From Head to Heart and Home, a channel created by women, empowering women to create the life they want, with your host, Shanda Soretti, certified coach, and Carla Center, subconscious healer. So today we're going to talk about the power of vulnerability. And this is a subject I'm super excited about because sometimes people just take vulnerability as that you're making yourself open to hurting, and they don't see the power in being vulnerable.
Mm.
And I love that we decided to share this with you and just like open up your your mind to what vulnerability can bring into your life. And go ahead and start, Shanda.
All right. Yeah. So this I'm certain this is going to be a beautiful conversation because like you just said, Carla, vulnerability is typically seen as a weakness, right? And what you and I both can agree on is that it's actually like a power, like an empowering thing, right? It's very powerful to be able to show up in a way that is gentle and soft and revealing, right? Even in those moments where it might be challenging. So I think how I want to start this is with like I'm thinking of like when when people get into circles, right? In groups.
Mhm.
We'll just start there. And you've probably experienced this before and I'm sure the listeners has have too, but even if you're in like a group of people, friends, family, maybe even strangers, but when somebody opens up and shares something with the group, um it actually sets a whole different tone to allow and encourage others to do the same too. So for me, that right there speaks volumes on its own. It's like if one person can show up in vulnerability and be okay with being messy or be okay with just feeling however it is they're feeling, they then set the tone for everybody else to open up to that same experience. And it's like an energy that you can feel. It's inviting. It's not something that you feel like you want to pull away from or shy away from. It almost makes you want to lean into it. So even just the energetics behind being vulnerable and what that means energetically, like I said, speaks volumes for itself.
Right. And when you're vulnerable, it allows for connections that could never happen if you don't allow that vulnerability, because we have up if you think about it, we put up armor to stay safe, right?
Mm.
You just think about like knights, and it's always been these walls that we put up. And like when we were in leadership, the best connections happened when we were vulnerable with each other, when we put down all of those safeguards, and the connection that you have with people and the real relationships that are not based on the masks that you have on. It's like, okay, I'm going to drop my mask. I'm going to
Mm.
allow you to see who I really am.
Yeah.
And which it's just like the name of our channel is.
Mhm.
You're down in your heart. When you're vulnerable, you're in your heart,
Mm.
because there's not in your head. Your head's where you go to stay safe, and your heart is where you go to really connect and be you.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty for me of vulnerability, is that when I do that, and sometimes it's still scary, I was the quietest person when we met, and it's that hidden, like you're staying safe, but you're also limiting yourself to this little space in your life, in your relationships, what is possible for you, because you're staying in this safe mode instead of being vulnerable and open to what else there can be in your life.
Yeah, I love what you're saying about like possibility because it does. It brings you closer to other people, right? It because you're opening up and you're sharing from a place of vulnerability, which is inviting to other people. And then it sets a really great example of that it's okay for them to do that too. And that's how you get closer to people. Is it's like bonding, right? We're sharing from a place of intimacy. And um without vulnerability, it's like we almost can't tap into that limitless possibility, right? Because we need to be willing to be vulnerable to step forward in those times where we might feel uncertain or we might feel unsafe or unsure or scared or whatever it is, right?
Right.
So it's almost like a fundamental key to tapping into, possibility and limitlessness. And I think the biggest maybe stigma or myth around this is that we need to be okay with being uncomfortable, right? We have this thing where like we just want to be comfortable. We just want to feel this. We just want to be happy. We just want to feel this, that, and the other. And it's like, that's great, right? But nothing new comes from that place, right? And if you want to heal something or work on something or expand something or try something, it's going to require vulnerability. It's going to require vulnerability with yourself, first of all, and being real. Like, do I want to do this thing? Do I want to experience this thing or not? And so that's probably the first step is we all know, you and I talk about this all the time, that it starts within, it starts with you. So, in order for you to create the space for others to be vulnerable, you have to be willing to create the space within yourself to be vulnerable with yourself first. And once you're accustomed, I won't say comfortable, but I'll say like accustomed or getting used to what that feels like, then you can start to branch out and maybe be vulnerable with other people and exchange in those types of ways. And start with the people who are closest to you, who aren't going to judge you or make you wrong or whatever, right?
Right. And I was going to say the same thing. Being vulnerable with yourself is such an important thing. Being vulnerable and honest with you and just seeing yourself, not to criticize yourself, but
Right.
to be aware of what's going on with you in your life and to understand. Because for me, I see clients, another thing that they do, they think they're being vulnerable because they share like victim stories. And that's not necessarily being vulnerable. Being vulnerable is being you without fear of what will come from the other person. Maybe you've been told you were awkward or you're not funny or whatever, and you are like
Mhm.
Shanda's hilarious, and if she wasn't vulnerable and shared that part of her, I wouldn't know that, right? That's her being vulnerable and allowing me to get to see who she is. And I love deep conversations. And so not everybody feels comfortable in deep conversations. And that's just who I am. And I didn't used to share that, right? That's me being vulnerable. I had to be like, there's nothing wrong with that. That's who I am.
Mm,
And I share that. It's not all about sharing my abuse and I'm vulnerable. It's sharing who I am as a person,
mm.
not what's happened to me.
Yes. And I love what you just said there about like sharing who I am,
Hmm.
right? Who I am, because that vulnerability piece then creates a segue for authenticity, and authenticity is the doorway to expressing yourself as who you are, right? Your real true self. So I always like to go to the analogy of like um if you get that like, ooh, I wish I could, I'm just going to make it up, do karaoke, but you don't let yourself do it. Or, maybe you're listening to live music and you're like, oh my gosh, I love this song. I really want to dance, but you won't go dance because there's other people, right?
Right.
Those are the moments when we're not willing to step into vulnerability. And those are the moments when it matters most because our heart is lighting up, right? Like we feel this like well of excitement bubble up to the surface, and then we tamp it down because of fear and fear of rejection or judgment or not looking okay or whatever, right? Not doing it right, whatever it is. And I think the antidote to that is that if you can just step into or choose love, right? This feels good and I'm going to do it and I don't care what it sounds like, what it looks like because I know how it feels, and just really trusting your body to communicate to you with what it needs because it always is. And think of how many times we shut that down. And then think of what that creates. It only creates more of the same. It also creates more pain, more resistance, more disconnection, right? More inauthenticity. And it almost builds this wall that we then start to hide behind, and then it's more work to try and get out from around it.
Right. And we're always trying to peek around it, but we're so critical of ourselves because
Mm.
We judge ourselves probably more than other people do. We don't like to accept and be aware of that, but it's the truth. Like somebody can say something about us and they probably will never think of it again, but we'll continuously say that
Oh,
same stuff to ourselves. And but the beauty is that you were vulnerable, you enjoyed yourself, and whatever Shanda and I've talked about this many times, they're mirroring themselves. Like that has to do with them. That doesn't have to do with you. But how you speak to yourself 100% has to do with you.
yeah.
So love and enjoy, if you went out and did the karaoke, the dancing, or whatever the thing was, and you enjoyed yourself, just be grateful that you decided to be that vulnerable and that you're watching your authentic self come out to the world,
Yeah.
because not everybody does that, and
Yeah.
that's part of our journey.
Ooh, big word just came up for me, courage.
Yeah,
Guys, it takes courage to be vulnerable. It does. It also takes courage to heal. It takes courage to use your voice. It takes courage to do many things. And, it's like I almost want to ask the question like, when has stepping into courage ever led you astray? Do you know what I
right,
mean? I'm not saying that all of these things are going to be easy because they're not, right? Stepping into courage isn't something that's easy. It takes a decision, it takes a choice. But even if somebody has a thought or feeling about you, that's okay. They're allowed to have that thought and feeling about you. How do you feel about you? That's all that matters. If you're like, you know what? I cannot sing, but I love singing, and you go and you do it, it does not matter how other people think or feel about that. What matters is what it brings to you. And again, going back to setting the stage and setting the example, who cares if you can't sing? You're telling people that it's okay to not be perfect. It's okay to
right.
not have it look a certain way. It's okay to be unique and authentic, right? That's empowering.
Right. And it just brings more joy to your life, right? I
Yes.
mean, think about I can't sing, just so y'all know I can't sing. However, I do have my headphones in, and so I don't even have the background music. I sing while I clean because first off, I cleaning's much better if I get to do that. But and I used to be like, "Oh, you can't do that." And then I'm like, "You know what? This makes it so much better to me. Whatever." I'm sure there's things that my family does that I am like, "What? What are you doing?" But doesn't matter. It's just who I am. And I sing. You guys don't wanna hear it probably, but it
Oh, I
brings
do.
joy to it. Oh, we'll sing later. It brings joy to what
Yeah.
I'm doing, and that's part of that authentic thing. What you're doing, your activities, things are uncomfortable, but as you go through it, the joy that comes with it is way more worth what's going on than like the safety is. And coming from somebody who has hid most of her life, like I had to be the smart good girl, and so, anything that was not was outside of that, like I hid. And there's a lot of like sadness in that. Like you're so busy trying to be somebody that you're not, and not being vulnerable with anybody because they will think you're something that else besides, that mask. And the beauty that comes in being vulnerable and being your authentic self, like, expands your life more than you ever thought possible.
Yeah. When you in my experience, when we cut ourselves off from feeling undesirable emotions like sadness, rejection, fear, anger, disappointment, resentment, whatever, when we shut those down, we equally shut down the opposite experience as well, right? So I have that pendulum analogy where it's like wherever we're willing to go in one direction, we can only experience the same in the opposite direction. So if we're only willing to go a little bit into the uncomfortability, if that's a word, then we're only going to experience the same on the other side. So think of like I want to say vulnerability almost as like your pilot light, right? Your pilot light is always there, it's always on, and those little nudges to like go and do something is that spark that will make the fire happen, that will
Right,
bring the joy into your life, that will feed your soul what it desires.
right. Right. And that hiding and not letting that vulnerability brings in that numbness. And,
Yeah.
so
It's the disconnection, right?
we're so disconnected from who we are that we don't feel the joy, the gratitude, the love, the compassion for not only ourselves but others, because it all starts with us.
Yep.
And Shanda and I say that all the time. Everything starts with us. So being vulnerable with yourself, trusting yourself, loving yourself, being compassionate, all of that starts with you. And if that's what you want with other people, you have to start within.
Yeah.
So vulnerability starts with yourself. So take a look. What do you love to do that you don't do because, you're not sure how it'll turn out, what reactions are? Find a place, do it. Maybe it's in a small spot. Maybe you just do it at home with yourself and
Mm.
slowly build up the courage to go out. We're not saying you have to, like, I love to sing, let me go do karaoke in front of 100 people. You could, you probably have a blast. But if you're like, ooh, you can step your toe in and be like, oh, that was fun. Let me really expand this out. It
Mm.
all starts with taking steps. You get a choice every single day.
Mhm.
What are my choices today? Am I willing to be vulnerable with myself and with others and just feel the joy of being me?
Yeah, I think the most beautiful example that I can think of when it comes to this is remembering what it was like to be a kid, like uninhibited, right? Remember, and that for some of us might go back very far because maybe there was a certain point in our childhood where we were no longer allowed to be a kid, right? But somewhere along the line, we experienced that and we played and we laughed and we fell down and we got back up and we got hurt and people hurt our feelings and we did it messy and we got it wrong and we broke something and we still kept trying and we still kept moving forward and we still kept doing these things because they lit us up, right? We didn't have all of these worries and these limiting beliefs of shouldn't, couldn't, can't, what will, blah, 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 all the others, right? So that is like the segue into remembering, right? Is remembering what vulnerability is like and what it can do for you and how it can really spark your life is remembering what it's like to be a child. And if you can't remember your own experience, look at any child's and watch them play and explore and how much fun they have. If you have your own children, watch them. If you have grandchildren, witness them and just see how uninhibited they are from all of these restrictions that we put on ourselves as adults. And so that's like an exercise that you can try is be a kid for a day. Play with your kids on the floor or your grandkids on the floor or your nieces and nephews. Even playing with a dog. If you don't have kids around, maybe you have an animal, play with your animals and they'll show you what it's like to just let loose and have fun.
Right. Right. Because you have this choice to have fun. And think about when somebody, as Shanda saying, you broke something or make a mess. You can sometimes just laugh at what happened, even though, man, it was not what you want to happen.
Yeah.
Or you can be like super hard on yourself. And for me, think about when, I mean, kids wait for your reaction.
Yes.
They wait for your reaction. And so these are learned behaviors. So say you make a mess, like we've all spilled coffee or a drink, and then do we, like, get really upset and really angry, or do we just laugh because it happened, because you can't do anything once it's done, right?
Mm.
But you can allow yourself to laugh about it and be like, "Okay, this is just a moment in my life, and I can be vulnerable and with everybody and laugh with them and be like, okay, or I can be like, oh my gosh, look at this. My day is ruined. Here
Mm.
goes forward, right? We
Yeah.
have a choice in those things, and children don't, until we teach them to react in a certain way, they don't get all upset like that. You
No.
know,
No, I'm laughing because we try to use humor as much as we can around here and we tell jokes and all the other things and we're really goofy around here and there's something to it, right? It just creates this lightness in the air and it's like it's okay when something undesirable happens. We don't make a big deal about it. Um, you know, and I what I want to share actually is so I have a son who he'll be 9, is coming up real soon, which is wild. But anyways, and we watch some movies here and there, and there's a movie called Captain Underpants, and it's like the epic something. Anyway, it's hilarious. I never thought I would catch myself saying that about a kids, a specifically boy movie. I'll just say that. Captain Underpants speaks for itself. But anyway, there's a character in there, and his name is Professor Poopy Pants. Okay. So it's funny because ever since watching that, like we'll say 9 months ago, what I started doing was I just created this result for me, this experience where instead of like, you know how if you stub your toe on something, so you might slip out a bad word, or you might be like, oh, like that was so stupid. Why did you do that? Right. Around our home here, we don't use words like stupid and can't. We try not to use those words. If we do, we correct. But um, so I started replacing any of that stuff with poopy pants. And every time that I would, if I dropped something or stubbed my toe or something didn't go just the way, I would say poopy pants. And I didn't realize that I was doing this until my partner caught me one day and he's like, "Did you just say poopy pants?" And I was like, "I think I did." And it's just funny because like, look, we're both laughing because
Right?
it just creates this light-hearted funniness where it's like things just don't have to be as heavy as we make them. So, like, this all comes back to being vulnerable. I'm being vulnerable to sound kind of silly and saying poopy pants and risking somebody hear me say that because it's like become an autopilot thing now. So
Right?
I don't know when it's going to come out anymore. But
Right?
how can we step into vulnerability to create a more joyful experience, a more playful experience,
Right.
right?
Right, and just to enjoy life, you
Yeah.
know, it's when people talk about healing, recently I've had people who are like, "Well, you know, healing's hard, blah, blah, blah." Well, we get so in these like things are heavy, and when you become vulnerable, we expect it to be heavy because it means you're going to get hurt, is what we have been taught. But it really opens you up for joy. That's what we're trying to say. Like, it's not, things are not about being heavy. It's
Mm,
you take the courage, next thing you know, you're like, I had no idea life could be this way because I was living in my box. I was keeping myself safe. All my armor and walls were on, and I was just going through the patterns and emotions that are normal to me on a daily basis. And
yeah,
as you become vulnerable, you're like Shanda said, you are hitting that pendulum and it's swinging
yeah,
bigger. And you're feeling more joy, more compassion, more love, not only for yourself but other people, and your your world opens in a
right.
way you didn't know possible.
Yeah, so we need to be willing to be vulnerable to experience the emotions we want to experience. We need
Yes.
to open up to that. We get to experience that. And it reminds me, it's like vulnerability is the gateway to move you from living life to experiencing life.
Yes.
Right? How many people feel like they're just living life? They're just here, they're just going through the mundane of every day. And it's like versus actually experiencing and enjoying. And with that, yes, comes the good and the bad, right? Both. But you get to experience life that way, not just have life kind of unfold for you, right?
Right.
And it's like creating your experience versus just being present. Very different.
Right, right. It's going from life happening to you to creating the life you want,
Right.
which is what we talk about all the time. We want to encourage you to create the life that you've always wanted. And sometimes it's uncomfortable. Sometimes you're like, things didn't happen the way I wanted to, but it has opened up to some other experience. There's so much more in life than just like we were born, we go through, we work, and we die, which
Right.
is what we're taught. There's this straight line, there's nothing in between. The only way you experience stuff is it magically happens to you and you have no control.
Hmm. Yeah, and I like what you're saying about sometimes we will experience ease. Sometimes we won't experience ease, but that does not mean we're not on the path, right? It's to me like how I see it now is that again, getting into vulnerability, it's the universe creating opportunity for you to grow and expand in this area, right? Where we find discomfort is where we have room for growth. And where we find ease, that's great. And it means go further, like go even deeper, explore even more, right? Go bigger, because complacency is kind of where your dreams come to die, right? Like everything comes to die there. Complacency is like just going through the motion without any type of intention or connection. How empty, like that just feels so empty to me. And, you know, I know sometimes we talk about like really big concepts, and maybe this is a big concept for people, but even distilling it down into the smallest things throughout the day. How can you bring joy to the smallest things, like making a cup of coffee or a tea? I used to do something in the morning when my son was really small and things were quite hectic and I was a single parent, where I would get up early and have a quiet coffee in the morning because that brought me joy, that lit my heart up on fire. And it meant that I had to rework certain things and maybe sacrifice some sleeping time or whatever, but I was, vulnerable in telling myself like this is what I need and making it happen so that I could feel like I was creating what I wanted in my life on a daily basis. So these things don't have to be huge, grandiose concepts or ideas or actions, right?
Right. And that, so we've talked about like taking an inventory of your life, and that was a way of being vulnerable. And that's kind of what Shanda's saying. So look at awareness is huge, huge, always in your life. So you have this vulnerability with yourself. Okay, what's going on in my life? What feels stagnant and like this is not what I want. It's happened, no judgment.
Hmm.
This is what's happening in my life. Maybe you don't like it, but be vulnerable with yourself. Okay, what are the patterns that are creating this in my life that I can step outside of this, even though it's uncomfortable because I know this, because this is what's on a normal basis. This is my pattern. Step out of it and open up for joy coming into my life in a different way.
Mm. Yeah. And I think something that I want to add to this that we haven't mentioned yet, which is a key component to any type of healing and growth and awareness at all, is honesty, right? So you have to be radically honest. And when we're honest, we don't always like what comes up, and it's okay. Like Carla was saying, don't judge it. It's okay. So to be really honest with yourself, you can ask yourself two questions. Is this true? Right? Once you say the thing, ask yourself, it's okay to question yourself. Is this true? Right? And then the second question would be, how do I know? Okay? Because we can be really sneaky at lying to ourselves or misleading ourselves in order to stay in our comfort zone, in order to keep ourselves protected, in order to keep ourselves where we're at. So, also have that awareness to question the thoughts that are coming up, the things that are coming up, and make sure that you're in integrity, that you're in
Right.
your truth and your authenticity while you're being vulnerable.
Right, right. And just see how like much that makes this openness of your life, this change, this
Yeah.
um being honest and vulnerable with ourselves can be like, oh, like that's
Mhm.
not because we have made it as being a victim to somebody else, which it's not. And
Yeah.
so as you open up, like Shanda's saying, like you wouldn't believe the beautiful things that you'll also, when you're honest with yourself, the good things that are happening in your life.
Yeah.
Because you're like, okay, I'm not going to judge. I'm just going to flat out look at what's going on. I'm going to be vulnerable with myself. I may not like what I see, but this is the way that I get to step into the next part of my life.
Yeah, and I'll say from personal experience that the most challenging moments, the most challenging decisions, the most um vulnerable that I've ever been, and as feeling all the feelings that came with that, those all led to my biggest transformations and my biggest ahas. Every single one of them have led me to something bigger and greater and even more expansive than I ever could have thought, right? So
Right.
it's like I think we'll tell everybody who's listening all the time, don't shy away from these things that might feel uncomfortable or scary or unknown. It's okay. That is where your growth is, right? And so it's like do it anyway. Like,
Yeah.
what is the worst that can happen? Right? I always like to say if right now is your rock bottom and things couldn't get any worse than right now, which by the way, they can't, just so everybody knows, because whatever you've created in your life, you can create again. So no matter what you have going on in your life right now, this is your rock bottom. Things only go up from here. What great news is
Right.
that? So like what's the risk? There is no risk, right? It's like there's no risk. Go. Figure it out. Try it.
Right. And what else is possible? Like I've said multiple times, when you do that, you're opening up for what else is possible. You know what's possible with your current patterns because that's what you're living right now. But what else is possible as you step into this vulnerability and you're open and aware and honest with yourself about what's going on in your life and what you're willing to be courageous and step into next.
Yeah, absolutely. Beautifully said. So there's your question for homework. What are you willing to step into next to create what you want to create? What is it going to require of you to let go of? What is it going to require you to be vulnerable around or about? Right? Start
Right.
to investigate, start to explore, and be radically honest with yourself as you go through that process.
Yeah, and you just get to be curious. Like Shanda's always reminding you guys, be
Yeah.
curious about what else is possible. And it's life is just whatever we decide and choose. And it can be as beautiful as we want it to be or as numb and stuck in the same place as we want it to be. We choose every day.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what can you do today to fill up your joy, right?
Yeah.
How can you spark that pilot light, right? And create something that lights you up today. Don't
Yeah.
wait. Yeah.
Beautiful. Do you have anything else you want to share?
I
You
feel
feel
complete. Absolutely. Yes.
I do too. This has been an amazing conversation, and I love that we came across vulnerability, the power of vulnerability to share today because it's a big thing, and people do misconstrue what vulnerability is, and to empower yourself is a huge thing. And if you have any questions, you need support, just reach out to us on the channel. You can find us on social media. We are happy to always support you. And we appreciate you listening to our conversations and allowing us to be there for you. If you enjoy our conversations, don't forget to subscribe. It's a little button. And we are so glad that you shared with us today and would love to talk to you soon. Reach out. Bye for now.